Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Joanna and today we're looking at all the varied colours that spacecraft and other vehicles can have. And it's not just hull plating and paint. We'll also be looking at whatever this is later on too. The big grey elephant in the room here is that a lot of spacecraft are also big grey elephants. And it's been that way from pretty early on too, which is understandable. The light colour contrasts against a black backdrop, so it's super easy for an audience to visually read what's going on as soon as they see it. I'm sure there's also technical reasons why a nice, neutral but bright tone was chosen, and it just kinda stuck. Similar light tones are used on realistic near-future spacecraft, and those using the NASA punk aesthetic due to thermal regulation. A white outer layer reflects that pesky unwanted heat from sunlight, helping maintain a livable temperature inside. There's also a lot of grey in real-life military vehicles too, particularly planes and ships, which in turn is used as reference or inspiration for fictional vehicles. Obviously, this isn't the case for ground vehicles, which use specific colours to match their environment, from solid greens and browns to more elaborate camouflage patterns, like the blocky urban camo seen in Cold War Berlin. And ships have had camo too, most famously the dazzle patterning seen around the World Wars. These crazy patterns were intended to make identification of a vessel's size, heading and movement more challenging, making it harder to hit at distance. But with dubious effectiveness and the rise of radar, it stopped being used in favour of this more generic grey that's everywhere, which is a form of camo itself, despite the capabilities of modern sensors. And why not? The grey helps the vessel blend into the atmospheric haze, and is a much better average colour than the old Mountbatten pink or air superiority blue that some ships and planes have been painted. But none of these options are good for spaceships, unlike the blacks seen on the first stealth craft. But these are this colour somewhat coincidentally, since the radar-absorbent materials just happen to be black due to having lots of carbon in. The same applies to the anechoic tiles on submarines, and they don't really need much visual camouflage at all. Further reinforcing that this black appearance is a coincidental bonus is the recent rise of alternative stealth coatings, like this shiny stuff that's been in testing, or the bright white seen on some UAVs and the B-21 Raider, and of course the same boring grey on the F-22 and other 5th gen jets, which is a bit of a shame because black vehicles are just undeniably cool. I mean, look at real ones like the Blackbird, Nighthawk and B-2 Bomber, and all the fictional ones like Kit, the Batmobiles, the Darkstar, and of course, insert your favourite here. But is black really a good colour for fictional spacecraft? Beyond being cool, there's a case for it being camouflaged to match the background of space, but what about all the non-visual sensors? It doesn't help with those, though in settings without such sensors, or those with lots of electronic warfare, visual range combat is a lot more important, and so is visual camo. But being hard to see is not good for visual media, unless being mysterious is the point. Take the USS Vengeance from Star Trek Into Darkness. ILM had to use a lot of clever lighting tricks to make the very dark hull of the ship visible, like subtle backlighting and silhouetting against nebulae, rim lighting to pick out the edges, and specular highlights to shine off its hull. All of these work great for more brightly coloured ships too, but are practically required for black vessels to be seen and understood by an audience. Which brings us to another way to do ship colours: identification. Look at this quick colour block thingy for Star Trek. If you're familiar with the 90s TV shows, and I know that you are, I bet you can tell which colour represents the Cardassians, Federation, Romulans and Dominion, right? Of course, not everything in the setting follows this, particularly the Klingons who seem to just do whatever they want. But even with that, this makes an easy way for the audience to see and understand what's going on in all those battle scenes in Deep Space Nine. The shape and form of things can be used for this purpose too, as is the case with the original Star Wars trilogy, where both sides use somewhat similar grey tones, which worked well enough for the one big space battle of those movies. But the prequels had a lot more going on, so the two sides of the wall there ended up with painted markings: red for the Republic, blue for Separatists. And considering the younger audience for the Clone Wars TV show that followed, using colours in this manner really seems like it was meant specifically to make things easier for an audience to understand who was on what side. And this is really where painted sections start to show their strength, because you can use all sorts of colours to differentiate factions from each other, like the oranges of the MCRN against the UN's blue, blue in the Expanse. This is something that strategy games have done forever, differentiating players by whatever colour their units and structures are adorned with. Nebulous takes this idea and really runs with it, going so far as letting players use their ship's colour schemes as a full-on identity for their fleet. And in real life, there's things like the invasion stripes used by Allied aircraft in World War II. This doesn't just need to be done using paint, as the raw materials and colour of the hull itself can show technological differences, or alienness, or opulence, or the hull and paint together are used to tell ships apart based on who makes or who uses a ship, like in Star Sector. This in turn informs the player about the ship's capabilities, like knowing that this variant is in bad shape and is less capable since it's in pirate colours. Extra painted markings can also be used to add a bit of variety to individual ships in the same class, like all the colours used by various California classes in Star Trek Lower Decks that mirrors Starfleet uniforms. There's a lot of other reasons to paint and decorate ships, beyond adding purely functional markings like identifiers and warnings. If it's a civilian vessel, then perhaps branding is a concern. Or maybe there's a special livery to celebrate art and culture, even if just temporarily for a special event or anniversary. Tradition, morale, superstition, and religion are all mixed up together and can provide very strong reasons for applying additional art to vehicles, like the nose art on many older military aircraft or the Chinese eye on British tanks. Speaking of eyes, we get back to this from the introduction, a vessel from Matterbeam's Syncverse, in which such decorations are used for intimidation. The idea is that if you're in visual range to see such details, then you can be seen. Also, if you're being literally stared down by a scary face on your opponent's ship, perhaps you'll think twice before engaging them in combat. It's a small thing, but perhaps enough to tip the balance in a tense situation. So what about reasons to not paint ships? Well, depending on the setting, it won't ever really be visible to anyone. Not every ship will go and dock to places with nice windows, or is capable of landing. Therefore, external decorations may be seen as a waste of time and effort. For more realistic settings, paint does have mass and reduces delta V. This is why the Space Shuttle external tank stopped being painted white. It was just wasted mass. And finally, all the same reasons in favour of painting apply as well, just in reverse. Perhaps it's traditional to leave ships bare. As we can see, there's lots of reasons behind what to colour a spacecraft, or really any vehicle. There's practical realities like environmental protection and various types of camouflage, and other considerations like in-setting culture or out-of-setting gameplay and audience needs. Or maybe the creator just wants to have something more colourful. On top of all that, special markings can add even more flavour and personality. Personally, I think paint schemes can look pretty damn cool and are perhaps a little underutilised. Not everyone can or should go full Chris Foss with the wildness, but cool shapes and patterns can add so much character and identity to a setting. Flatter colouring still absolutely has a place though. I'd be lying if I said I didn't adore the earthy tones of the craft in Dune, or the iconic Aztec greys of Federation ships. But those also have other ways of showing their style through shape and texture. Either way, there's a lot of options, and a lot of reasons behind them which you should think about for your own creations. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our frigate and spacefighter design reference books. Alternatively, you can support us directly through YouTube by becoming a channel member. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.